Diffuse knapweed has involved adding a suite of insect species to the community. We have 5 species in total, 3 that chew on the above ground parts of the plant, 2 that chew on the below ground parts of the plant, and these 5 species collectively sort of force the plant to, instead of being able to make seeds, the plant has to repair the damage that's being done by these insects. It greatly reduces their reproductive potential. It also greatly reduces the ability of the plants to compete with the native grasses, to take up the water and the resources. The native grasses then, as the plant is stressed, take up more and more of the space. On this graph, you'll see that seed rain, or how many seeds were produced per square meter out there, started at almost 5,000 seeds per square meter in 1997. And that number quickly dropped to about 3,000 per square meter, probably due to the fact that we pulled the cattle off the site. But then in one site in the year 2000, and at all sites this year, we see a total collapse of seed production by the knapweed. This is the combined effects of all 5 species of insects working over this plant to reduce its seed output. And so collectively, the 5 species have simply reduced the reproductive output of this plant to near zero. At the release site, the knapweed densities have actually disappeared in small plots and are well below, I think on average over the entire plot, they're about 80% less than they were when we started in 1997. The USDA has set up a series of tests that are put to all insects thought to be useful biocontrols in this country. When they're brought in, they're tested to see that they are host-specific or target-specific, that they don't eat near neighbors within the area, nor do they hit any economically important plants. These tests become more rigorous in the last 10 years, and at least for diffuse knapweed, we think that our insects are very, very host-specific. In fact, this summer we had 2 students follow these insects around and see if they were eating anything else, and the good news is that they showed no sign of being able to do any damage to any plants other than diffuse knapweed. Out there now we see definitely more abundance of native grasses, we see more abundance of the native forbs, and most interesting, one of the groups of forbs that has recovered the most are North American asters, which are relatives of the knapweed, which is now declined in abundance.
This is our insectary at Cherry Creek State Park, and when we first got to this plot, this was nothing but 2.5 acres of solid spurge about waist high, and I would probably estimate about 80 to 90% canopy cover was leafy spurge. So in the last 2.5 years, we've started introducing Aphthona flea beetles to this site, where we've now gone from an 80 to 90% spurge canopy to right around 40 to 50. And what spurge is left is probably less than 2 feet tall, showing signs of pretty extensive feeding damage from the flea beetles, and will probably be non-existent in the next couple of years. This is crested wheatgrass right here. You have some of the, which I believe is blue grama here. None of this was present before. The presence of the flea beetles has allowed these grasses to become established once again and hopefully compete with the spurge. Oftentimes the amount of control that you get from herbicides is annual. If you do not come back in and retreat a site with herbicides year after year, the spurge will eventually come back in and take over the site. The major advantage with flea beetles is that you get that long-term control year after year, and oftentimes it can be anywhere from 65 to 85% is a normal control number for flea beetles, sometimes even as high as 95%. So the advantages are pretty clear when you start looking at the numbers. In 1999, we released approximately 50,000 flea beetles on this site, and again in 2000. It is now late summer of 2001, and instead of adding flea beetles to the site, we've been collecting flea beetles off of this site, and our returns from this year were approximately 1.5 million flea beetles. One of the concerns that we have from landowners is, will flea beetles affect my desirable vegetation? The answer is no. The USDA tests all of these insects under starvation tests against native vegetation. If they show any signs of feeding on that native vegetation, they're immediately excluded from the program.
In 1975, Colorado imported Rhinoceros conicus, musk thistle seed weevil, for control of that plant. Over the years, we collected and redistributed about 500,000 of these beetles around Colorado. And at this time, it's difficult to find a musk thistle infestation within Colorado that does not have Rhinoceros conicus well established and working on the seed heads of the thistle. Over the last 10 and 15 years, Rhinoceros conicus has reduced the thistle infestations in many locations. It's proven also effective at helping control the plumeless thistle, and has crossed over as well to feed on the flower heads of Canada thistle. Since that time, though, they've also discovered that Rhinoceros conicus will feed on some native thistle. To date, they haven't shown that it's reduced the plant density of the native thistles to any degree, or been able to measure just how damaging it will be on their populations. For this reason, conicus has been held up as an example of poor biological control and how dangerous biological control is. But in my opinion, it's a very poor example because, again, when it was introduced, it was known to have a broad host range. If it were being applied by today's standards, there's no way it would be allowed to be introduced into Colorado. The other side of the coin is I think it's done an excellent job of controlling musk thistle. And had it not been introduced 25 years ago, what would musk thistle be like in Colorado today? How many endangered species or native species would be replaced because of this very aggressive and introduced species? And I don't believe that that has gotten enough attention in the argument. So.
Now, if you can see what the Rhinoceros is doing, it's laying its eggs on the side of the thistle blossom here. And when those eggs hatch, the larva goes inside and parasitizes the blossom and also the seed. All of these blossoms are full of eggs, so you could pretty much say that this thistle won't produce any viable seed this year. We did manual control on the railroad tracks last year. We didn't do any spraying, because we wanted to get the population of these Rhinoceros up to the fact that they were actually going to do most of the control with us. If you look down here, the remains of what we chopped down last year, we got the seed numbers way down here in this area. There's about 20% of the thistle in this 6-mile corridor as there was last year, just from manual control. And then the beneficial weevils could continue to do their work, and we also introduced 2 other species of thistle attacking weevils.
Several different manual methods can be used to control small to medium-sized infestations before they become a larger problem. Hand pulling can be effective in keeping small outbreaks from getting out of control. Many parks have begun programs enlisting volunteers to pull weeds.
With the Volunteer Weed Warriors project, the results are that we have successfully hand-pulled weeds out of small areas. We have been able to at least stop the spread of weeds in some of the larger areas, and that we've been able to nip some really small new invasions in the bud. That to me is the most important aspect. Hand pulling has definitely been good for us in scattered areas, and frankly, with some of the weeds that we're dealing with, it seems like we're getting just as good of results, especially in scattered infestations with hand pulling, as we would with herbicide.
Sometimes pulling the entire plant is not necessary or effective. Indeed, some weeds' root systems are stimulated by pulling. It is often beneficial to simply cut and remove the seed heads of the weeds, reducing regeneration and spreading. Mowing larger areas can work well where other manual controls are not practical. This weakens the plants and reduces seed production.
So we come in late April, early May, and try and burn off the thatch, stimulate the natives, stress out the non-natives, and then we come back in when they're stressed again.